Hey there, all you people. First and foremost, before we start the episode, I just want to thank you guys all for listening to us and tagging along on our little adventure that we're going on. This is episode 9 we're doing today, right?
I think so.
It's wild. But yeah, thank you guys so much for listening and for being a part of this. You know, we couldn't do it without you guys, so we really appreciate it. Stanley, do you want to say any kind words about our wonderful listeners?
Well, our audience couldn't do it without us, so there you are.
So you're welcome.
We're going to talk today about customs and rituals. And I said to Mickey, if you want to talk Jewish, we could fill the whole half hour with just that. There are so many happy ones and less happy ones. Shall I jump in for a minute?
Let's jump in. We're doing rituals today.
Well, I mean, if you're a Jewish boy, and you are at all religious, you will prepare for bar mitzvah, which comes at the end of age 12, going into age 13, when presumably you are changing into a man. Well, that's a joke, because I don't know very many 12-year-olds who are ready to be a man. I was preparing for my bar mitzvah, which is scheduled around the time of your birthday. By that time, we had been living for a while in the new part of town, but I had to learn a part in Hebrew for the ceremony on a Saturday morning, which involved going back to the old part of town for instruction with an aged teacher. So I didn't like the idea very much, but I did it because I was obedient. So I got on a couple of buses and I went to South Dallas, and I greeted this man one day, and he said, Shlomo, that's my Hebrew name. He was looking very gray and solemn, and he said, I have news for you. And I thought, oh, this is not going to be good. And it was not good. They had scheduled the date for my bar mitzvah incorrectly. And I had already started to learn my part in Hebrew, which is not so easy if you are not, readily conversant with the language. He said, we will have to reschedule you for a different Saturday. And okay, so we did. And I did it. And I guess I did it okay. Honestly, I have absolutely no recollection of the event except just what I said now. My Gentile friend Tommy, he remembered it because he came as a good friend to witness the ceremony. It was the first time he had ever stepped into a synagogue. And he remembered it very well. I actually did not. But anyway, it was one of those happy rituals. You want to give us any from you?
Yeah, sure. Before I do, I have a couple questions about that. Do you remember any of what you had memorized?
Not really. No, I had not memorized it. I had only learned to read it in the Hebrew. And of course, the true Hebrew scholars read the letters without any vowels. There are a series of, I believe, 5 vowels, e, o, a, that go underneath the letters. But if you are a true scholar, you read the letters without the vowels. Huh. Well, I was certainly not a true scholar, but it was enough to learn to read the letters with the vowels, which I did. And of course, I have kept up a certain amount of reading of Hebrew, not very much. The most familiar prayers that you heard from the very earliest part of your childhood, those are things that probably one does remember.
Yeah, I suppose in the Catholic faith, at least the way that I grew up, I mean, well, no, and certainly in the Catholic faith, confirmation is the same thing as bar mitzvah. I think, I guess. I mean, confirmation is essentially when you decide at the ripe age of 12 that you want to remain being Catholic and continue on the religious path. It's your own choice now that you're old enough to make that decision, which I did make that decision. I was confirmed when I was, I guess, 12, I think, or maybe a little younger.
You have any recollection of that?
Vaguely. I mean, again, when you go to Catholic school and you're 9, 10, 11, 12, you kind of just do what you're supposed to do. You don't really think too deeply about what it is that you're committing to. So I did my confirmation. All my friends were doing it, and I thought it was just the thing you do. So you pick a confirmation name, and I really wanted my confirmation name to be Genesius, which was the patron saint of actors. But I got nervous because my full name is Mikhail Petrus Stein, which is a pretty strange name. There's no normal words in there, so I wanted to have a normal name in my name. So my confirmation name that I ended up choosing was John. So my name is Mikhail Petrus John Stein, under the Catholic faith. But I kind of sometimes regret it because Genesius is such a cooler name than John. But I didn't think about much more about it than that. I just wanted to have a normal name.
When you get a confirmation name, does that name stay with you beyond confirmation?
It's only in the faith. So I suppose if I were to get married in the Catholic Church, I imagine that the priest or whoever's what's the word? The officiant. Yeah, whoever's officiating my wedding wouldn't say my name with that name in it. But outside of that, I mean, it's not on any paperwork or anything. I the only people who know are who I tell, you know. But, it's an interesting ritual, confirmation, because it is similar to the bar mitzvahs and bat mitzvahs. It is this sort of passing of the responsibility onto you, but you're so young. So it's weird that you're given that kind of responsibility at that age. But I mean, I guess, growing up in the 30s, I imagine the amount of responsibility you had at a young age was far more than the responsibility that kids my age or kids in my generation had at that same age. And go 100 years before that, and 12-year-olds are already, full-on adults, basically, doing work and all that stuff. So I guess maybe it's a relic of olden times that's the age that people are given that kind of responsibility. It seems silly now, but it probably wasn't back then. I don't know.
It reminds me of that wonderful show, Fiddler on the Roof, where Tevye, the father, and the milkman father, who is such a marvelous character, has, I forget, 3 or 4 daughters, and he presumably decides who each one will marry.
Yeah.
Although there is certain amount of backlash there. And at least 1 or 2 resist that idea and go off on their own, which causes all kinds of havoc with him and his wife. But it's a wonderful show, and it certainly dramatizes a lot of Jewish rituals. The Friday night Sabbath is portrayed in one scene with the mother, wonderful character. She lights the candles, as the mother always does. And when she lights the candles, she covers her hair and makes a certain circular motion with her arms, with her hands. I don't know exactly what that symbolizes, but it's very traditional. I remember my mother doing that. And it's the kind of scene that if you grew up with that, you remember it. It's very moving.
I went to a couple of those. What is the dinner called? I I suppose it doesn't happen every Friday. You have people come over. Is it Passover? I think is what I'm thinking of.
Well, Passover is only once a year.
Yeah, so I think that's what I'm thinking of. What is Passover again?
It is the telling of the exodus of Jews from Egypt.
And this is when the spirit of death passes over the
Yes.
homes that have the lamb's
That's
blood
correct.
or something on the door.
Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah.
And Passover very often coincides, or almost coincides, with Easter.
Huh.
Almost always around it's a spring event.
Yeah.
Except Passover goes on for several days. And by the way, that's also part of the rituals for Jews. If you are observant for Passover, you do a lot. you change dishes. You put away the old dishes and bring out some that are just for that holiday. You clean your house thoroughly so that everything is dirt-free. And of course, you have a different menu. You do not eat bread. That's the whole point of Passover.
Because they didn't have the time to...
That's right. They ate unleavened bread, as it's called, unleavened bread. You have matzah. And matzah has, of course, become very popular now. There are various kinds of matzah, so that there's that intermingling in a way of the two religions celebrating something around the same time of year. Yeah, I always think that's very nice.
That it is cool that way. Again, I peripherally know a bit about Judaism, but not a whole lot. And I went to a number of, when I was a kid, I played baseball, all from the time I was 6 years old all the way through. And when you were 13, and you were playing baseball in the league in our town, it was called the Bar Mitzvah League. And it was because so many Jews lived in our town that if you were playing baseball at that time and you were in the Bar Mitzvah League, it meant that we didn't schedule any games on Saturdays. When you were that age, because every single week 3 or 4 people on a team were having bar mitzvahs, and every kid would go, so nobody would be at the games. So we were playing in the Bar Mitzvah League. I must have gone to 50 bar mitzvahs and bat mitzvahs when I was a kid.
Really?
Yeah. It was. Do
you remember really cool. Any of those?
Yeah. I remember a lot of them. I don't understand what they were saying because they were speaking in Hebrew, but I do remember a lot of them, and I collected all the yarmulkes that I got. They give the yarmulkes out at the front door of the synagogue. But yeah, so I have all those yarmulkes still.
Do you remember throwing the candy?
No, I don't.
There's a tradition in some synagogues. At the end of the bar mitzvah ceremony, the people in the congregation take little pieces of candy and throw it at the bar mitzvah boy as a symbol of good luck.
That's so sweet. Do they throw it very hard?
Yeah. You get hit with candy, and presumably that sets you off on a happy and successful adulthood.
Yeah, that's so strange, but cool. I think it's funny, when you first suggested that we talk about rituals, having grown up Jewish, your mind obviously went to Jewish rituals in your youth and just in the faith as a whole. My mind immediately went to like daily rituals, the idea of developing rituals for yourself, because I think we're all creatures of habit ultimately. And so the rituals I was thinking of for this episode were how you make your coffee in the morning, the time you get up, and building sort of a set of personal rituals that you engage in every day. And I was curious to know if you have daily rituals that you do.
Probably about the same as anybody else. Nowadays, I get help in the morning from a helper, so I kind of have to wait for him to get there. And then I get out of bed and I, go through the same stuff that everybody does when they get up. I like it. I have come to understand that a healthy ritual is to try to go to bed and to awaken around the same time every day. That it puts your body into a good ritual, speaking of ritual, and that you become healthier that way. And I think that's probably true. Nowadays, I go to bed pretty early, although I may watch television a little later. So, yeah, I think so. Aside from the daily rituals, there are some non-religious rituals that I have been part of. I think about school graduations. I think about weddings. Well, weddings have a certain religious part to them. Graduations, I have been part of a lot of them, including not just mine, but my nieces. And certainly weddings, not mine, but others, been part of wedding parties growing up. And my nieces also. I have to tell you that something that has very much been in my mind at those moments is the absence of my brother. When my brother's two daughters, Elissa and Marcia, had graduations, I was always there. And I think maybe earlier, I don't know, maybe bat mitzvahs. Certainly weddings. Marcia asked me if I would want to give her away at her wedding, and I thought, no, I would be glad to, except that by that time there was a stepfather who had lived with their family for several years, and it was only right that he be the one to do that, and he was. I was part of the ceremony. I loved doing it. And I think that some of those moments were moments in my mind when I particularly felt the absence of my brother. It really should have been he who gave away his daughters at their weddings. Indeed, it should have been he who was at their graduations. But he had died when they were still so very young. And I guess maybe that's called guilt. I'm not sure. That it was I who stepped in at some of those moments when he was not there. And it, even now when I think about it, I think, gosh, now of course there were grandchildren even, and he has missed all of that.
Do you think that rituals, I mean, I don't know why we have all the rituals that we have, but do you think that in some way rituals are opportunities for us to remember the people that aren't around?
That's a very nice idea. I do think so, yes. I don't call upon those recollections. They're just there.
Yeah.
They're just there.
It's interesting how, like, one of the things that rituals have done for me in my life, you know, not that I've personally engaged in a great number of significant rituals like weddings, and, you know, I've been to a lot of weddings and I've been to a lot of funerals, but I haven't had my own wedding yet, fingers crossed. But I do find it interesting how people sort of block out their life based on the rituals that they've engaged in, you know, because you have your childhood and you have school, then you have graduation, and that's a pillar in your life, a turning point from one chapter to the next, and that ritual signifies that turning point. And then you have your young adulthood, maybe your work and your promotions and this and that, and you find out that stuff, and then you get married, and that's another ritual that signifies this turning point in your life. And then you have children, and then there's birthdays, which are obviously a ritual that we all have taken part in, that signifies that. And then later, maybe there are fewer rituals as you get older, but certainly when you look back on your life, you kind of look back on it in a way where these rituals signify the chapters, you know. And again, I'm not at a point where I'm looking back on it yet, but I'm asking you, do you sort of see it that way?
Of course, yeah, sure. And included in that, not just graduations and weddings and so on, but of course the opposite, which are the deaths and the funerals. Judaism expects that when someone has died, the family will observe that with a period of mourning that can go on for weeks. The immediate observance is the first week when you, as this saying goes, when you sit Shiva, you stay home, you do not work, you do not look into a mirror. You have friends come by and visit with you, but you mourn the loss of the person. I told Mickey that I wrote a while ago a piece about a cemetery in Dallas, and he said, "Why don't you read it?" That took no encouragement at all. So I'm going to read you a piece to do with rituals. It's called The Cemetery. There is a Mexican fellow who takes care of the Jewish cemetery in Dallas where my parents, 2 aunts, and 4 grandparents are buried. "Ah, Senor E," Alejandro shouts when I visit, and he spots me across the lawn. He leaves the mower, comes over to shake my hand as if he were not the caretaker, but the official host. I am glad to see him. There's no way that I am able to remember the number of visits I made to that cemetery in the decades since leaving home. But in my mind, it is part of my family history. Solomon, my paternal grandfather, an immigrant from Romania, was one of its founders, and his name is chiseled on a stone post placed in the ground. It was for him whom my parents named me. He and his peers established the cemetery about a century ago to be a Romanian burial ground. Later emerged with Shearith Israel, a conservative Jewish congregation in Dallas. The founders chose a location where immigrant Jewish families were settling. That's a neighborhood later deserted for newer spots. An exception was Bubby, my paternal grandmother, who refused to move and insisted on staying where she first settled in Dallas, and where she had friends who also spoke Yiddish, at least until they decamped. A visit to the cemetery means a half-hour drive from upscale areas of town where many Jews live today. Decades ago, my parents purchased the plot where they expected to lie. My father paid for its perpetual care and asked for a document to testify to that, so there might be no dispute. Not that Jews dispute, of course. The plot contains room for 4 people, and my parents are buried in 2 of them as planned. My older brother and sister are at rest in states far from Texas, which leaves 2 spaces for me to do something with. One part of my plan is to be carted there from New York and buried in one. There are newer Dallas burial grounds which Jewish people choose these days, but they seem almost antiseptic and have no meaning for me. In the remaining space, I decided a few years ago that I wanted to erect a small stone bench inscribed with our family name. It was to be a place for any visitor to rest. There are a few such benches around, so I did not foresee any resistance. I was wrong. The synagogue representative vetoed the idea, saying that a bench would disrupt maintenance of the lawn. I was angry and mentioned it one day to Alejandro, who intervened and told the synagogue that it wouldn't disturb his work. His voice carried, and the bench soon got built as I had envisioned, simple but handsome, with our family's name chiseled discreetly in place. I don't think the synagogue representative cared for how I got my way, but I did it all the same. The bench will, I hope, be there for perpetuity. All this about cemeteries probably seems morbid to some people, but I'm one who likes such places, and my visits to the one in Dallas cloaked me with a sense of peace and continuity. It is kept so beautifully that its age is detectable only because inscriptions are now fading on the oldest stones with all Hebrew letters. While there, I may allow tears to flow, and I carry on one-sided conversations with my parents to bring them up to date on family, and slightly late to try settling some unfinished business. I look for small pebbles to put on their stones as a way of saying they have been visited. Not only are my family members there, but seemingly dozens of others who are parents of kids I grew up with, whose houses we used to go to for parties and maybe a shot of liquor. Ambling around those narrow walkways, I say hello to Mr. and Mrs. Schwartz, Tootsie's parents, some Rothschilds, and all the senior Levins, plus, sadly by now, a few of my contemporaries. It's a place where I feel oddly at home. Lately, with worsened mobility, I go to Dallas less than in the past. I miss Alejandro's welcoming and the chance to pet the dog at his heels. I've enjoyed seeing birds always hanging out on the branches of some inviting oak trees. I like to think those flying creatures have been coming there for decades, witnesses to a parade of funerals and folks like me whose first visit may have been when they were brought there innocent and young, and who return today at the age of most of the permanent residents' arrival. Maybe the birds will still be around when I move in.
That got me, Stanley.
Well, I'm not ready for that, and you're not either. So,
No, not yet. It's such a beautiful way to look at cemeteries, though. I find that I imagine similarly with Shiva, and certainly in the Catholic faith, funerals and death are so sad. Like the structure of the ritual is designed to be sad, which is so strange to me, because there are other cultures wherein the death of friends and family members and the ritual around celebrating their life is not sad at all. And I went to one Jewish funeral for a guy. I'm sorry if I get the name wrong, but I only met him a few times, and I was young when he died. But I believe his name is Glenn Markman. He was a friend of my parents, and he had his funeral at the Holocaust Museum in Brooklyn. And it was the happiest funeral I'd ever gone to. There were thousands of people there. At least it felt like that. I mean, the entire interior was filled to capacity, and they had to put televisions outside of the museum so people could watch the funeral from outside. And we were inside, and we got to listen. But his wife was supposed to give the eulogy, and she was unable. He died fairly quickly. He got a severe diagnosis and died in 6 months. I don't remember what kind of cancer it was, but he knew he was going to die, and so he spent all of those 6 months throwing parties and inviting everyone that he knew, and basically spent 6 months saying goodbye to everyone and sort of crossing all the T's and dotting all the I's. It's kind of an interesting gift to have, to know you're going to die. But by the time the funeral came around, everyone kind of already had made their peace with him being gone, and his wife was supposed to give the eulogy, but she couldn't. So someone else read it on her behalf, and they played a song that I don't know if it was in his will or if it was just a wish that he had asked of his family to say, but they played a song, I think it was his favorite song, and they made everyone get up and dance in the funeral.
How wonderful.
Everyone was crying and dancing. It was the strangest feeling. But it's the first time I really thought about how funerals can be happy, but we choose for them to be sad. It's almost like an indulgence in grief, where everyone gets to come and just let it out. But it's interesting. The way that you look at cemeteries as a place that you're comfortable and enjoy being, I've never really thought about it that way. But I really like it.
I don't much look forward to being there, but I will be at some point. I hope not right away.
No. I'll come put a pebble on your stone, though.
That ritual, I think, is lovely. You do put a stone on a grave, and it symbolizes that you were remembered. People remembered you. Someone remembered you. And sometimes there are so many stones, there's no room for any more. It's sort of funny, but that's how it is.
Well, we are at 40 minutes.
Oh.
Wouldn't you believe? But I think that this was wonderful. I read a joke that online that I thought you'd think was funny. Maybe you will. Tell me if you don't. But it was a priest, a minister, and a rabbit go into a bar, and the bartender asks the rabbit, "What would you like to drink?" And the rabbit says, "I don't know. I'm only here because of autocorrect."
Oh. Okay. Yeah, right.
do you get it?
I do get it.
Not so funny.
It took a moment, but yeah.
All right, well, I tried. I'm not a comedian, guys.
Well, Mickey, I love being here with you.
I love being here with you, Stanley.
Yeah,
we'll do it for quite some time longer.
We actually we have made a surprisingly good pair.
I know, right? Who'd have thunk?
See you next time.
Yeah, see you next time, everybody.